Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. Basically, this is practice for what you asked to do in a real job. Now, in this lesson, we're going to create a new page in Blazor to display our products from our API. Using the Bootstrap 4 CSS that's already in place, we'll configure a grid of products with placeholder images for now. Now, for those of you who are subscribed and Patreon at the $5 per month level or higher, head over to get a copy of today's source code from this video to compare to your source code that you're typing along with me. All right, let's jump right into Visual Studio. And we're going to concentrate today just on our portal. Specifically on a new page we'll create for our products. And this will be just a placeholder for now. We'll get the UI in place, and the next lesson we'll wire up to the API. But there is one bit of housekeeping I want to take care of. Let's run the application. I want to show you a bug that's been pointed out that we need to get fixed. And that is, it was an async issue that we need to address. So let's go over to our WPF application. And once this authorizes and logs us in, we can log into our WPF application and then go to Users, User Management. And if we select, let's say, Tim, I am Tim Corey, notice that this box, which first of all, we need to fix that spacing. We'll do that later. But for right now, that box is not showing admin and cashier for Tim, I am Tim Corey. I'm going to point out why this is and then how to fix it. So if we, and notice by the way, it's locked up right now. I can't do anything. So let's close this out. We'll stop this, which I already stopped. And let's go over to our WPF project. And inside here in the helper view model, let's go to our user display view model. Let's scroll down here to this right here. We already have it to do is say, hey, pull this stuff out because we have 5 lines of code in a set for a property. Not ideal. We probably want to change this over to be a method and a property separately, but for right now, we have it all in a set, which can be okay, but I prefer not to. But here's the problem. This right here, because it's operating asynchronously, this is an async call. This load rolls, there you go. It's an async call, and so it's awaitable, but we're inside of a set. And inside of a set, you can't make an await call or an awaited call. So we did the .wait, which .wait, what it does is it waits for it to complete. But the problem is that this async call isn't going to happen on the UI thread. And so since that's not the case, then what happens is the wait is happening on a different thread, and so therefore it never comes back to notify a property change, and it kind of just hangs there waiting to complete. So we want to take this off. Now, what that's going to do is going to give us a green squiggly and say, hey, this is an awaitable call, but you're never awaiting it. What that means, and this is not ideal right now, but it will work. But this is not ideal because what it means is we're firing off an asynchronous call, which as we know is going to happen on a different thread. Doesn't always happen on a different thread. We do an async, but in this case it will be. So since it's on a different thread, it will not report back anything, including errors. So this load rolls, if it fails, oh well, it fails. We don't know, but it fails silently. We would have to have logging inside of this async call, the load rolls, in order to even capture it in a log statement, but we're not going to know in our application that this failed or succeeded. It just kind of goes out there and is ignored. Everything's ignored. So that's not ideal. The other thing is that this, if it takes a long time, may complete after this is called, which in this case isn't a huge deal because this is just saying notify that this property has changed. The fact that the roles have changed isn't the end of the world, okay? So we have the user roles already, and now we're doing a load roles here, which doesn't have to happen right away, and it's not necessary to have it happen before this notify of property change occurs. So essentially, we're calling it async call, but ignoring what happens to it. And then we're continuing on as if we don't care if it succeeds or fails. We're just saying, hey, go do that and see you later. All right, or not, actually. And so that's not terribly ideal, and it's not something you should do for most cases in async. However, in this case, it's going to be what we need. So for now, I'm going to leave this like this, even though it's not my preferred way of making an async call. So let's load this form again. Let's go to Users, User Management, select Tim, and now you can see Admin Cashier, Sue just Cashier. Bob gets nothing because Bob has no role. So that takes care of that. Now, again, we should fix these drop-down boxes so that they are, or it's this list boxes, so they have a minimum width. But that's not something to worry about now. We'll just leave it as this because this is working the way we expected it to. So with that, that's our one simple fix. We can get on or get back to the original purpose of today's video. I just want to make sure we save that change. Okay, so let's close this out. Let's close down WPF and get back to pages in our Blazor WebAssembly project called Portal. Let's right click on here and say add new Razor components. If you're not familiar, yes, Razor components are Blazor pages, or can be. So yes, it says Razor, even though it's Blazor. Yes, it's confusing. Naming is hard. So let's call this just products. And now we have a products page. Now, in order to have it actually be callable directly, we have to say at page and then give it a path. Let's say products, like so. So now you can go to the products page in our application. Just to verify this works, let's run this web application just to see that we have a new page in place. That's this web page once it loads. Loading takes a little bit of time because we're loading up 3 different projects. We're loading up the API first, then the WPF project, and then the Blazor WebAssembly project. So those 3 things take time. So now I can say /products, and now we have a products page. There we go. So that's all we need to do to get a new page in place, is have that at page directive. So we can close this down, make sure we close down all the other peripheral things and start working on this page. Now, what we have coming from the API is a list of products. And in fact, in our WPF project, we have this, let's show the view for this, the sales view, where we have a list of our items, we call them. And that's the things for sale, which right now we only have 2 things, the Eneloop batteries and the book Finish by John Acuff. So again, just sample stuff. But those are the things we have on our products page. I want to do it a little bit differently for the web, where we have a page dedicated to just all of our products we have available. I want to see maybe an image of them, which we don't have in the database yet. We'll have to add that in the next lesson. But I want to see an image of it. I want to see the description, the title, the amount, or the price, and how many we have in stock, or the quantity. So let's create a little grid that shows off these elements. And so in this video, we're going to create that grid. We're going to create placeholders that will represent default or test products. We can then change over to be the actual products from the API in the next lesson. Now, for those of you who want to get ahead, this is a great time to do that, because once we complete today's lesson, you should be able to take the API call that we know how to make that call, get the data, and wire it up to the grid that we'll create today. So a really great opportunity to work ahead and then compare notes with what I do. All right, so let's create our grid here. So I'm going to create, we're using Bootstrap 4, which is the built-in framework for CSS layouts in our ASP.NET Core project types. So that's the same for MVC, Razor Pages, Blazor Server, and Blazor WebAssembly. So let's start off with div and say class equals container fluid. All right, so we're going to create a container that's a fluid container for this element. And then inside here, we're going to say div class equals row. And just so you know, you can open these projects in VS Code. And I'm tempted to. I love VS Code, especially for editing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's an amazing tool. I do have a video on this channel called Intro to VS Code that will show you how to do that. And it has built-in tools like Emmet, where you can say things like div and tab. See that? It creates my divs for me. There are some of those things built into Visual Studio as well. It's just not quite as full featured as VS Code is for editing HTML and CSS. But I'm not going to go too far into Emmet because it's kind of outside the scope of this video. But if you want to get more into that, I do have a full course on web development you might want to check out on my my site, imtimcorey.com. Okay, so I'm going to create one row, and then in here, I'm going to create a for each. Oops, at for each. So, and the reason I create, whoops, not a for each, let's create a for loop. So at for. And the reason I'm doing a for loop is because I don't have my set of data from the API. So I just going to create a number of copies of one element just to see how it's going to lay out. And that's what the for loop's going to do. It's going to loop through a number of times. Let's pick a simple number. Let's do 7. And the reason I do 7 is because I want to have at least 3, maybe 4. I think we're going to stick with 3 columns of these products. And then that means I'm going to have over 2 rows. I'm going to have 2 rows plus 1. So 3 columns per, or 3 products per row. That means 2 full rows plus 1 partial row. That gives me a good idea of how it's going to look in the page when I have a number of products. We can add or subtract from this 7 to play around with different numbers to make sure that maybe having just 2 is okay, having 18 is fine as well if you want. But this for loop will allow us to play around with how many products we add. Again, these are just sample placeholders to see if we get the UI right, and then we'll come back through, and in this code section, we'll look up our products, and we will, instead of doing a for loop up here, we'll do a for each loop, and with the same set of data, is just replace the placeholder values with real values from the API. Okay, so in here, I want to create a div, the class equals, and I've kind of already worked through this a little bit, so I'm not going to do too much playing around with this, but I want to show you a layout that I think is going to work for us. And that's going to say call -XL, which means an extra large column, 4. And call the large column of 6, and call the, actually, I think that's it. We'll just do extra large and large, and we'll let the medium and the rest shrink. And I also want to have a margin on the bottom of the 3rd iteration. It's not 3 width. It's not 3 is not a number like 3 pixels or 3 EMs or something like that. 3 is the 3rd type of margin, the 3rd width of margin. And if this confuses you and say, Tim, I have no clue what you're doing right here, this is all Bootstrap 4, okay? And if you go, let me pull up the page here. If you go to getbootstrap.com, this is one of the best sites for documentation I've ever seen. If you go to docs right here, first of all, right now I am on Bootstrap 5.1. Notice on the right-hand corner, this drop down, it says 5.1. That's the latest version of Bootstrap. I'm actually doing a course on Bootstrap 5.1. Leave a comment down below if you're interested in that course, you're looking forward to, or if you have any questions about Bootstrap 5 that I might be able to answer in that course. So that's going to come out soon. But we're using Bootstrap 4 because that's what comes bundled with ASP.NET Core at this time. I've heard rumors that in .NET 6, which we're on 5, but in .NET 6 I've heard that we're going to have options possibly with Tailwind possibly, but also Bootstrap 5. So for now though, we're on Bootstrap 4. So you want to change the documentation to Bootstrap version 4.6. Notice you can also change to version 3.4.1 or 2.3.2. You only get a few options, but that's the latest version in that major range. Meaning this site has all the documentation for Bootstrap 5, 4, 3, and 2. So in Bootstrap 4.6, if you go to layout, you will see how the containers work. You will see how the grid works with all the different columns. So notice that call just means extra small, whereas I'm using call-LG-, that's for large, and XL for extra large. The number of columns is 12, meaning there are 12 divisions on the page. And if I say, let's go back to our code here. If I say call XL-4, it means for the extra large break, meaning the max container with its 1140 pixels, that I want 4 columns out of the 12. So how many do you get in 12? 3. That's what I want. I want 3 separate columns, which means I have to use 4 columns per visual column. Okay, I know it's a little confusing, but what it's going to do is it's going to do things like this, where you have 1/3 here, 2/3 here, 3/3 here, and that's our breakup. Okay, but then at large, I want to have 6. Well, how many times does 6 go into 12? 2. So the large breakpoint that I want to have the total width of each column be 6 of the possible 12, which means half the page, which means 2 per row. So we'll see that visually in a minute, but just know that Bootstrap documentation is here. It's great. It's going to walk you through all the different stuff. Again, I'll do a course on it soon that will explain it even more depth and more clarity. But great documentation. I almost feel bad doing a course for it because it's really just so clear. But I do think it's important to do a course. Okay, so now that we have our section right here, I'm going to say div class equals container. You may say, well, Tim, what are you doing here? Because you already have a container up here. Yes, I do, but inside this row, inside of this section of columns, which would be 4, 6, or all 12 if it goes below large, I want to have another container inside of here that has a row. So I create a grouping inside of the overall section. And in this row, I'm going to say, you know what? I want to have a div with a class equals call dash. I'm going to say that, just say call dash 12, which means extra small. And inside of here, I'm going to say, I want to create an anchor tag, which that's a link. And for right now, I'm going to say href is just empty. But then inside here, I'm going to create an image. And then I'm going to say that the source, I'm going to leave it blank for now. And the class equals img-fluid. And the alt equals placeholder image. And let's unpin this here. Placeholder image, and let's close that out. And now we have the close of our anchor tag. So it's going to be an anchor tag, which means the whole image will be clickable. And that will, for right now, lead nowhere. And in fact, even after I bring this stuff from our API, it'll probably still lead nowhere for now. But I eventually want it to lead somewhere that says, hey, this is where you can get the product or something like that. And that just kind of like lets us have that for later when we're ready for it. This image, right now we have no placeholder image, but we need one. So we're going to come back to that in a minute once we actually learn how to use a placeholder image. But that's the image. And then we're going to say, let's create a paragraph tag with a class equals my-2 and text justify. All right, so what is my-2? Well, this is margin in the y-axis, which means it's margin on top and margin on bottom. And it's, again, 2, which doesn't mean 2 pixels or 2 EMs. It means the second division of the margin. So if you go back over here and just search for margin padding, and it says, hey, in margin padding, there's a spacing utility. Click there, and it says, okay, here's the explanation here. So we have margin or padding, whichever one you need. And again, if you're not familiar with CSS, this can be a little tricky, but you're going to need to know CSS to work with the web. So if you're not comfortable, there is that foundation web development course that will explain all of this from the actual raw CSS, not Bootstrap specifically, although it does introduce Bootstrap, but tells you about margin and padding and all the rest. All right, now in classes as well. Classes are hugely important. So it says what side? Top, bottom, left, right, or X, which is both left and right, or Y, which is what we're using, top and bottom. And then what size? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and auto. Right now we're using 2, which is the spacer times 0.5. And I'm not even positive what the spacer is set to right now by default, but we can look that up if you want to. But just so you know, play around with it and try it out, the different sizes, 0 through 5, see what you like. All right. Now, and again, you can modify those using SCSS if you want. Now this text right here is a placeholder description of the element. So we're going to say a placeholder example of how this layout might look on a full page. Something like that. So, and there's our first paragraph. And our next paragraph, we want to say paragraph class equals margin at the bottom of just 1. And then we're going to say strong. Let's enter here. Strong, which strong is essentially like bolding it, but it's not about bolding it as much as it is about saying, hey, this is an important element, or this is something to look at, or this is something to call out special. If you're not familiar with HTML, HTML is designed to give you structure to your page. It's not meant to style your page. That's what CSS is for. So don't look at this as just, hey, it's a bold thing. It's more than that. Even though that's what it does on almost all, in fact, all I think, browsers, is make it bold. That's not what it's designed just to do. It's meant to call it out or emphasize it. So strong, and we're going to say quantity. And then we'll have a space here and put 0. So we have 0 quantity of this placeholder element. And that's all for that div, but we need one more row. And whoops, I put it in the wrong spot here. We need one more row. Class equals row. And then div class equals col-12, which means the entire width. And then we're going to have a paragraph here, and we'll say class equals H4. Now what this is doing is it's going to set the size of the element to be an H4 size, or a heading 4 size. And MB, let's do 3 here, margin bottom of 3. Now, why would I not just do an H4 here instead of a paragraph? Well, the reason why is because, again, HTML is about structure. And if I were to say this is an H4, it's like an outline on a document. So you have an outline where you have your title, and then you have major points 1, 2, and 3. Under the major points, you have minor points 1, 2, and 3. Under those minor points, you have, and those are the headings. So heading 1 is a title, heading 2 is a major points, heading 3 is a subpoint under a major point, and then heading 4 is a point underneath a subpoint. Well, if you say this is a H4, that puts it in the outline, which is not what you want to do. This is not an outline element. This is just a sizing thing that says, hey, I want to say that the sample item, which the name of it is $0.00. So this is, we don't want to call it out as structurally part of the outline. We just want to style it to be a little bigger. So that's the difference right there. Okay, so let's look at this in place. I know you did a lot of typing here. I wanted to see what this looks like for 7 elements. This being a product page. All right, so once it loads, we'll say /products. And there you go. We have our elements, which look kind of ugly because we have placeholder images that don't actually work. All right, so let's fix that. So we'll close this down. We'll close down all of our other stuff. And now let's put something in this image source. I'm going to show you a site you might be familiar with, and that is dummyimage.com. This is a pretty cool little dynamic dummy image generator. So for instance, if you want to create a dummy image that's 600 by 400 pixels, this is the URL to do it. You want to change that, no problem. In fact, we're going to change it to 1200 by 900, like so. We're going to keep the background color of black. We're going to keep the foreground color of white. And so that right there is our URL to use. That's to give us this little placeholder image. So let's minimize this. We're going to paste that right there under image source. Is that placeholder image? We're going to hit start again and see how this product layout page looks. All right, so once it loads, go to /products. And there we go. So now we have a products page that actually looks pretty presentable. We have our product images, which are these black boxes here. We have our description right underneath them. Down the bottom, we have the name of our item. We could swap those around if you wanted to, put the description below and the title at the top. I kind of like this. It kind of brackets it a little bit, but it's up to, the way you want to display it. But the really cool thing here is right now we have 3 columns and then we have 3 rows. But if I were to change the size here, let's just start shrinking this page down a little bit and watch as it gets smaller, those images scale with the element, but then at some point it trips over to 2 columns instead of 3. And the images actually get bigger. Notice there's the breakpoint right there. And that is the breakpoint between extra large width and large width. And now we have the 2 elements per row, and we have 4 rows. So 1, 2, 3 are full, and then 1 is a half row because we have 7 elements. We keep scrolling or shrinking it down, and then we get 1. So it's the full width of the page, the white space of the page. And then as we shrink down, that gets smaller, and then the full page, we lose the menu on the left-hand side, the gutter, and it goes to the top, and now we have the full width again. And that's a pretty responsive page that looks good at pretty much every resolution. Now I'm assuming they shrink and grow, but if we do the F12 here, which actually brings it up in a different window, let's go ahead and dock this at the bottom. If you're not familiar with developer tools, hitting F12, really important to learn how to use those. I think I'm a broken record here, but check out the Foundation Web Development course. We go over these a lot because there's a lot of stuff in here to show off. One of them is this. Let me zoom in here. Actually, I need to zoom in with my other zoom. Right. Nope, that's not what I want to do. Zoom in. There we go. This right here, this icon right here that has a little phone and a tablet size element. We want to click that. All right, so click that. What it does is it turns on a simulator that simulates different sizing for example, the Pixel 2 or the iPhone 6 Plus or the iPhone X. So there's the iPhone X and what it might look like. This is just an estimation. And basically it's just doing the resolution of that device. But you can see what it looks like on iPhone. And again, with this orientation, or you can rotate it. There's the rotated view. And then you can say, oh, well, what's an iPad look like? Again, this is just resolution size. It's not worrying about the actual device. So if your device isn't on here, no problem. Just choose responsive, put in the width and the height of the device, and it will display how it's going to roughly look on that device. No need to publish this out and load it on your phone. So really cool stuff there. You can try it out. Dual screen mode, what that might look like. That's a little ugly, but dual screen's a little funky. So I wouldn't worry too much about it yet. But there we go. There is the layout and look for the different elements or different devices. Okay, so with that, we can actually turn that back off and close out our development tools. I think it's a pretty good look and layout for our items. There are some things I did that I didn't explain too much in too much detail because you kind of have to know how Bootstrap works. But one of the things I did was I justified this text. If we go back over, let me drag us off the screen. If we go back over to our text right here, I said text justify. And what that does is when it's full screen, you can't really see it, but when you shrink it down a little bit, notice that the text will expand to fill. Let's zoom in here. It expands to go from edge to edge of this image. It even puts in a little extra space here compared to, say, right here. And that's because it's kind of growing and shrinking the white space as needed to have a full width on our text. If we don't do that, it looks a little funky. Actually, what I'm going to do, bring our developer tools back up. I'm going to select that section right here. I'm going to take the text justify off. Again, know your developer tools. These things are awesome. So now I can close this out. And now if we look at a comparison of this one right here versus this one right here, notice that this ends right at the edge where this ends a significant distance from the edge. That's because this is not justified. It keeps the common spacing, or how much spacing it needs for one space to be consistent throughout the entire paragraph. Whereas these spaces are a little bit different, which is sometimes obvious, sometimes not, but it makes sure that the text uses the full width. And since, for example, the word layout wouldn't fit in the white space after this, it wraps the next line, whereas this one, it stretches things out. So little things like that make your design look a lot better or a lot worse. Also notice I kept a very clean and simple design. I didn't go overboard with colors or boxing this off or anything like that. I don't think I want to go very flashy with these layout designs. And here's the reason why. I want this to be a fairly uniform page that has certain elements that draw your eye. Once we replace these black boxes with actual images, that will draw your eye. That will already be a lot. But then I'm going to probably want to have a button right next to quantity that says something like add inventory, where we click this and we'll be able to add more inventory for a given product. Well, I want that to be some type of color as well to draw your eye to the activity you can perform. So that's why I don't want to have borders and maybe color the background of this or other stuff like that. It's too much stuff. Whereas if you keep a simple design like this, the color will allow you to draw your eye to the activities you need to perform. So that's why I'm doing a pretty simple design like this. Now, one last thing, notice that I only have one row for my products. If we go back and look at this for each, it's inside of one row. Well, how is it I have multiple rows if there's only one actual row here? Well, the way that the layout works for Bootstrap is that once you hit 12, you wrap to the next line. So if you put 24 columns worth of items on one row, it goes on a two lines or two rows. So in this case, this allows us to load as few or as many elements as we want from the database, and it's fine with it. Because if we have 50 elements, no problem. It's going to say, okay, 3 columns for right now. Therefore, I need to have X number of elements or X number of rows. It's going to figure that out and do the math on it, which whatever that is, it would figure that out. 17, something like that, rows, and it would create 17 rows. Because then, as we shrink down and it says, oh, we now need 2 per row, no problem, it redoes the math. Now it's 25 rows if you had 50 elements. And then you keep shrinking, now we need 50 rows. So that allows us to have these resizable things work really, really well for us, even though we only have one actual row in CSS. And that's all we're going to do for this lesson. We've got our layout working for our products. It made it look pretty nice to actually have those different elements laid out. We're going to leave this placeholder for loop for now. And I'm going to give you this code as is. And then the next lesson, we're going to replace this with a for each once we bring our products in this code section down here. So this will actually change in the next lesson. But for right now, this works the way we intend it to. Now, if you got lost on this because it's UI and it's Bootstrap 4 and CSS and HTML and try to figure out how all that stuff works, don't worry. It's just not something you can just walk into having no experience in. You do need to have a little bit of knowledge of how Bootstrap works. I would highly encourage you to go check out the getbootstrap.com page. Just make sure you change the documentation to the 4.6 version, since that's what we're using in this course. Some people ask about upgrading to Bootstrap 5. The idea is, hey, there's a new version out, we need to upgrade to it. Actually, you don't. You can stay right where you're at on Bootstrap 4.6. I will cover the upgrade process and the things that need to change from Bootstrap 4 to Bootstrap 5 in my courses upcoming. But for the most part, you want to stay in the major version that you're at. Especially in the .NET framework, we were on Bootstrap 3. Moving from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4 was almost a rewrite. It was a very difficult process because there's a lot that changed. Now they do have in the documentation somewhere, migrations down here. Migration. Bootstrap 4 is a major rewrite. So here's the changes that you have to know about in order to basically rewrite your code. All right. So there are some changes from 3 to 4 that would be very difficult to redo in 4. Now, 4 to 5 isn't quite as dramatic in the migration, but there are some things to know. Now, again, I'll cover that in the course, but just so you know, I usually recommend staying on the major version where you're at to start, okay? Because if you did change this, you'd have to go back and change all of Microsoft's identity code if you'd use any of it by default. Now, in our case, we did not. We did our custom identity login page and sign up page and all the rest. So we wouldn't have to worry about that. But otherwise, you'd have to customize every identity page manually or redo it for the new version of Bootstrap. Okay? So if you're interested in learning more about Bootstrap, go to getbootstrap.com. If you're interested in that course that's coming out soon, get on the mailing list, but also let me know in the comments. I want to know how much interest is out there, and that may determine how fast I put this course out. But it is one of the newest upcoming courses in my IamTimCo.com library. All right, thanks for watching. If you are a Patreon member, don't forget to go get the source code for this video. And as always, I am Tim Corey.